Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And for the next hour and 15 minutes or so, I will also be the host here of the podcast. And I'm excited to have you here with us today. If you are joining us live or if you're listening to a recorded version of this, we're glad to have you whatever day it is and wherever you are. Appreciate you being part of our community. This is actually an exciting podcast in a couple of ways. We have a great guest. This is actually the first podcast in our new office. So we've moved to a new location, and new location means a lot of moving things and setting up technology. So hopefully everything goes well, but I think we're off and running. So I'm excited about that. Any of you that are familiar with our podcast, you probably know who we are and what we do. But if this happens to be your first time here, to give you a little bit of background, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint is a small national nonprofit. We were started back in 2019. I started the organization really after a personal experience regarding the use of restraint and seclusion, but our work is really much broader than that. While we certainly focus on things like restraint and seclusion, it's also things like suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. Yes, we still have 17 states that allow you to hit a child in a public school in the name of discipline. But even beyond that, it's often all the things that are done to kids in the name of behavior. And it's often about kids who are chronically misunderstood. So our work is really trying to advocate for better approaches, better supports. And we're big believers that the same things that you can do to improve the outcomes for children can actually improve the outcomes for our teachers, our staff, our families and communities as well. So you will often hear us talk about kind of what we call the 5 principles, but it's the answer to the question of what we should be doing instead. And it is trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity-affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative approaches. So if you are finding us for the first time, welcome. We're glad to have you here. If you are a repeat visitor here to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series, thanks for being here. It means a lot to have you in our community. So I want to welcome you and certainly thank you for being here today as well. And if you would, let me know in the chat, and I ask this every time, and I know it's, you're probably listening and doing other things, but in the chat, if you're on, Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, leave a comment. Let us know who you are and where you're from. It's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from. We have a very international audience. We have a lot of people here in the United States. We tend to have a lot of people in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK. And it's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from and who they are. So let us know in the chat if you'd like to, who you are and where you are from. And before we get to our show here, and as I mentioned, we have a special guest with us today, and I'll be introducing our guest here in just one moment, but we have Dr. Bethany Bilodeau, and we'll be talking about her work and also a book that she wrote as well. So hold on, we've got a great show in store for you. But before we get there, I want to share with you a couple of quick announcements. One, and many of you know this already, for the past year, we've had a sponsor for the podcast. And the sponsor for the podcast really helps us to bring you the podcast. So it really helps us to do the work that we're doing. And for the last year, we've actually had our friends and colleagues at the Bowman Consulting Group. So Bowman Consulting Group is made up of Rick and Doris Bowman, and they have been doing work in this area of kind of trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned work for a number of years, written a couple of books even just recently. They wrote a great book called Your FBA is a Fantasy. That book is really fantastic. If you're somebody involved in creating behavior plans, many of you know how I feel about traditional behavior plans. Many of them do not work. But this is really a great approach to creating something that is trauma-informed, that is aligned with what we know about neuroscience and behavior. They also have another book called Facing the Fantasy, Finding the Way Forward. Maybe you don't do FBAs and BIPs, but you want to bring kind of that neuroscience and trauma-informed approach into your classroom. Great resource for that. They're offering special discounts to our podcast listeners. So you can get 25% off of the FBA as a Fantasy book, and also 25% off the Facing the Fantasy book. So if you go to that webpage, and we'll share the link here in the chat as well, you can learn more and get a discount. Also encourage you to check out this special page that they've set up for our podcast listeners. So this is actually set up for you and tells you more about the work they do. They've got a brand new thing they've launched called the Invested Adult Live Behavior Lab, and they're doing a live event. So I encourage you to check that out. Rick and Doris are highly aligned with the work that we do here, and really appreciate them being a sponsor for the podcast. So encourage you again to check that out, and want to thank them for being sponsors here for our podcast. And with that, let's go ahead and get to why we are really here. I'm going to go ahead and bring our guest up on the stage with me. And I see a couple people have said hello already, both from New Hampshire. So that may not be a coincidence here. Let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. And again, it's great to see people already saying hello here. And let me go ahead and bring up on the stage here our guest, Dr. Bethany Bilodeau. And I'm going to read a short little bio here just to give people an idea who you are. You are an expert in human behavior with a Doctorate of Arts in leadership. You've had a remarkable career that began teaching high school biology in Guam. And little secret, my background was actually biology, environmental science. So,
oh, really?
I'm a bio nerd. So yeah, I appreciate that. You have designed innovative programs to help students achieve academic success and hold numerous certifications in behavioral therapies. You've also been recognized with multiple awards, including a 2024 Business of the Year in Education in the Business Excellence for Social Equity category. And of course, you have a book here that I happen to have in my hand here, Ease the Pain in the Classroom. And we might talk a little bit about this as well. But I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us here today. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to have you. So, you're probably, I mean, I know we've had a chance to talk before, although it's been a while. We've had, we have about a year. We're booked out about a year in advance for the podcast. So
yay.
From the time that we talk to somebody and say, hey, we'd love to have you on, to the time they're on, it seems like quite a while. But, we had a chance to kind of get to know each other a little bit more and learn more about the work that you were doing. And we were able to share with you some of what we're doing as well. So it was a great opportunity to learn more about you and your work. I want to focus today, though, on kind of your story. So, you're doing work with schools and, supporting families and doing some really important work. And I know from our conversation and from your book and seeing other podcasts you've been on, there are some things that you believe and value that are highly aligned with the things that we believe and value as well. So
for sure.
I wonder if you might take me back in time a little bit. What got you started down this road, in terms of, education, and tell me a little bit more about you and kind of the story that led you to the work that you're doing today.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is from a professional standpoint, I started as a teacher and I really struggled as a teacher. It was very hard for me. I was just fresh out of college, and the first couple of weeks of teaching, the students stole everything out of my classroom, everything except desks. They took my test tubes, my microscopes, everything. And I had missed a lot of steps working with them, really establishing good relationship, establishing trust, all those pieces. So I had to really back up and learn how to connect with my students and really make them feel safe and comfortable, because most of them had never passed academic classes, the majority of them. I had freshmen primarily, and this was a new experience for them. So that really kind of got me more excited about working in the behavioral field. And then when I started having my own children, my oldest son was actually asked to leave 3 different daycare settings because he was known just to be very physically aggressive at like 18 months old, which is sometimes okay. A lot of daycares are like, it's okay, we can manage it, so on and so forth. And then I get the call that my kid's the biter, like your kid's biting all the time. And, I said, we've really got to get a handle on this. And so I started doing a lot of research and working with OTs and PTs and different people and neuroscience people and things like that. And I really educated myself on how to better support him, because he's even started struggling up through grade school. And by the time he was in 4th grade, he actually exited special education. He no longer needed his IEP. But for him, that was really challenging. He had a lot of sensory issues going on and really had some challenges with that. And then my career itself, as we have evolved, we're an organization that really works with students who have some considered intense behavioral needs. Typically, our students are exhibiting signs of aggression, and we're coming in and working with them because they've been asked to leave a number of facilities. They've had a lot of academic trauma. They've been in situations where they have had people well-meaning but respond in ways that have made them feel very unsafe and very dysregulated. And because of that, those experiences have exacerbated and they've become more intense over time. And usually within about 3 weeks, we no longer see those behaviors. And it's just a matter of how we interact with them, how we stand, how we move, the things we say to make them feel safe. And they feel very trusting in that we are not going to put our hands on them in a way to control their bodies. And that is a big one that we stand with for, we're very much of, we're going to learn to trust you. You have to learn to trust your body, that you can keep yourself safe. And we're going to teach you those skills to do that, because many of them don't believe they can anymore, because they've been touched and managed so much over time, which I know, Guy, you've seen.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And
for
of
sure.
course, I mean, unfortunately, those approaches, while as you said it, are often well-intended, but people do what they know. And sometimes what they know is not necessarily rooted in the things that really are going to work and make a difference.
Absolutely.
But, it's hard. And if these are the things these are the things you do. And unfortunately, things like putting hands on kids, things like restraint, these lead to an increase, not a decrease in behaviors, right? So when kids are getting hands put on them, when they're being restrained, we see kids become more traumatized, more hypervigilant, more likely to have stress behavior, not less. So often you get a cycle that really feeds into itself, that
100%.
the more somebody is doing what they know, and unfortunately, I think as human beings, sometimes when the things we're doing aren't working, we do more of them, right?
Yeah.
So rather than saying, well, maybe it's time for a different approach. So that's why people like you and the work that you do is really important. I want to go back in time a little bit. So back to that first classroom you were in, when you described them kind of, stealing the microscope. Looking back on that moment in time, what was missing? Because I think about it today, and it would be nice to think that, well, from the time that you emerged from university and were ready to teach till now, that things had changed substantially and that teachers were getting more of what they needed to help them be successful. But I would argue that in many cases, we're still not getting to, kind of young teachers the information they need to really support kids. So reflecting on your own experience, walking into that classroom, not really being prepared, not even knowing some of the questions maybe you should have been asking, what was missing? What if we're going to, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and that others do to help support teachers now in the classroom, but if we're really going to stem the tide, what do we need to get upstream in higher education programs that better support young teachers as they come out of school?
I think they really need to know what makes someone else feel safe. I think that both for the teachers themselves as well as for the students, because most of these students that I was working with had some sort of trauma history, and an intense trauma history. And I came in with very traditional approaches and they didn't work. And for many teachers nowadays, they'll tell you traditional approaches don't work, and they don't. Kids do not fear authority. They don't have the same responses to all of those things. They fear their lives. They fear that they're not going to be part of the social collective. They fear all the other things that are putting, stimulus on their sensory system that's making them fearful just in general and agitated, and is, could be triggering or activating, is very challenging for them, and they cannot get to a point of feeling safe or feeling regulated. And I see this with teachers too. They're in this constant state of crisis. It's a cycle. And I see it with families. I work a lot directly with families, and families get in that cycle too, where they're like, there's always a crisis. There's always a crisis. And it's really a matter of them learning about how to create the calm and how to create that sense of safety for periods of time, so that their nervous systems can relax and they can get used to it and all of those things, because they're all in a state of hypervigilance.
Yeah, absolutely. And this work, really does begin with the adults, right? You
Well,
know, a dysregulated adult who doesn't feel safe is not in a good position to be able to run a classroom and help kids to learn. And of course, a child who does not feel safe, who does not feel secure, who does not feel, you know, supported, isn't in a position that they're able to learn. And I think, you know, I'm a big proponent of, and I'm sure the, from your work and the biologist in you as well, you know, of understanding human behavior through that lens of the brain and nervous system, and understanding kind of that regulation is a prerequisite to learning, right? A
absolutely.
dysregulated brain is not a brain that is able to learn. So when we begin to have expectations of kids that, you know, they're able to learn when they're not in that state, I think it's such a big blind spot.
It is.
You know, and you were talking about fear, and you know, not only does fear, not work, meaning that, you know, when a child is fearful or an adult is fearful, we're not in a learning state, right? And it's the wrong goal anyway. I mean, we don't want kids to just be afraid of adults. We don't, you know, and you know, but you know, often I think that you know, this idea of kind of discipline is rooted in, you know, well, what negative consequences, and how do we get kids to do the things we want them to do? And anybody that listens to podcasts a lot knows this. My least favorite word is compliance, because I see a lot of harm done in the name of compliance. But we've often, as adults, grew up in compliance-based systems, and it's what we know.
Yeah.
So how do we do it? We dangle carrots, or we threaten with sticks. But you know, again, that's not the right goal. So getting back to safety, and I think we're in just 100% agreement here that, like, this is a prerequisite. You want to create a classroom where, you know, even kids that might be having, you know, big behavior, and at times, I mean, you're getting called in and there's big behavior that's disruptive and maybe even aggressive. How do we begin by building a safe environment, and where do you focus? So, you know, I often think about the need to focus on the adults first, because if the adults aren't regulated, but where do you focus when you come in and you're asked to, you know, help in a situation where, you know, things are difficult? Where's your starting place?
I typically start with the adults because they're so escalated that oftentimes it's feeding the fire. So if I'm stepping in, I'm saying, I got this. Don't worry. This is expected. We've got it taken care of, so on and so forth. And I'm like, I thank you. You've done a great job. Thank you so much for helping. This is what I'm going to do. You can watch me, or you can step away if you need a moment. What do you need to do? And then I step in and I model exactly what we're going to do. And typically, all I need to do is get in and get into a certain stance. And most kids are upset for a second. And then as I'm watching them, because I'm gauging their body, because as we know, they can only stay in crisis for so long. It's usually about 1.5 to 3 minutes. And as they come out of that crisis level for just a few seconds, because they'll go right back up into it if they have the opportunity to do that, I'm offering them some sort of safety, you know, thing to access. So whether it's I'm taking off my backpack and I'm using that to create a smaller space for them, because the bigger the space, the more unsafe they're going to feel, or I'm taking off a scarf and giving it to them as a comfort item, or giving them water, because water is a natural regulator for all humans, whatever it may be, I'm offering them that option. And usually just my stance and my presence, which is easy to teach. I can teach other people how to do that same sort of stance that makes people feel safe. Typically the person starts to cry, or they start to vent about what the situation is, and they're de-escalating. They're coming out of it at that point in time. And I usually don't need to do anything more than that. And, you know, people will say, oh, what is it? Why does it happen with you? And I'm like, it's very simple techniques. It's how I hold my hands. It's where my thumb placement is. It's how my knees and hips are geared towards them. It's the way I'm tilting my head. It's all nonverbal body language that they're picking up, that I can keep them safe.
Right. You know, I think about that safety, and I think, you know, one of the really critical parts of this is kind of creating that relational safety, right? So, you know, we create that relational safety, and we now are perceived as someone who is safe, and the dynamic shifts considerably. And, you know, when people begin to see that, it looks like magic from the outside, right? Because if you see a child who's been responding to you in a certain way, and then they're responding to somebody else differently. It's like, well, what are they doing differently? But that's the key. The child doesn't necessarily change in that scenario, but it's often what the adult does differently. I mean, I think about my own journey as a father and some of the things that I learned, kind of early on in my journey, which were, again, back to the emotional contagion piece, right? That if we're coming in dysregulated and we're upset and we're hovering over someone, that is not going to help another nervous system to feel settled. But, sometimes when we take a step back or we make ourselves smaller, or we're using a calming voice, or we're being mindful of kind of our own presence, it opens the door for that relational safety, which I think is so critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Somebody asked here, Sarah asked, can you talk more about the stance you mentioned?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Usually what we do is we bring the hands in the front and the thumbs are slightly lifted. And the reason why we slightly lift the thumbs is because it naturally conveys self-confidence to the other person that you can keep them safe. You may not ever think about that, but if you ever think about anytime you've seen a person of authority, like a police officer or someone, if their thumbs are in their pocket, people get uncomfortable. They feel like they can't be kept safe. So we keep the thumbs slightly lifted. We tilt the head slightly to the left. And the reason why is because when we tilt it to the left, it conveys empathy non-verbally. If you tilt it to the right, it conveys intelligence. So I don't need to look smart. I just need to look like I can feel my feels. So I tilt it to the left. I smile a little bit because I have a lot of lines at this point in my life on my face. And if I smile a little bit, it makes me look more open and warm. I do the same thing. I lift my eyelids a little bit for the same reason, to look open and warm. And my hips and knees are always pointed towards the person. And the reason why, because this makes me look like I'm paying attention. It shows that you're attending. If your knees or your feet are turned away, and you're walking in to try to deal with a situation, the person's going to immediately think that you're done with them and you don't want to have this conversation, so on and so forth. So it's just really simple things. The thumbs are huge. That's usually what brings down the situation, as well as the head tilt. And for a lot of people, they have to learn that because they don't tilt their head naturally. They just keep it straight on. But for someone else to feel safe, they really need to feel like you're being empathetic with them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, feeling seen and heard, right? And it's interesting. I mean, you're kind of talking about kind of the physical dynamics that can be helpful that maybe you don't think about. I have a colleague, Susan Hopkins, with the Merit Center, and she talks about kind of soft eyes, right? I mean, It's amazing how there are certain things that you can do that can totally change how you're perceived by others. And as my grandfather used to say, and probably others, but perception is 9/10 of reality, right? What it's being perceived in that moment. And when we're intentional, I'm a big believer in like being intentional about things. When we're intentional about, how we might be perceived, it could really make a big difference, I would assume.
Oh, it's huge. And it comes right down to every part of like what we do and how we interact and those sort of things. Even simple things like if the bottom parts of your lids are flat, then someone's going to say, "Oh, you're not really happy with me." That's hard. And people don't realize it. They can't tell you the specifics. They can just say, "She didn't like me," or "her face wasn't right," or something like that about it. And it really is all those little nonverbal pieces that we break down and we teach people so that they know how to make the most out of their moments of interaction, for sure.
I feel like, I've not always had a good poker face, as they might call it, right? So, I remember sitting in meetings before and people are like, "You don't like that, do you?" But I think for a lot of us, I mean, we wear more than we realize sometimes, and being mindful of that really certainly can help. But, again, I mean, this is about, if we want to, get to the thinking, logical, rational part of the brain, even in trying to help a child who's having a difficult time, we've got to help them get regulated, and we can do that through that relational safety and by connecting that space. That's so important. So tell me more about, kind of how you, we support, we do some work to support schools as well, and do a lot of speaking and, work with educators. Sometimes when you begin by talking about the adult, all the focus is put on the kid, right? So a child is having a difficult time. A child is having big behavior. What do? They do a behavior, they do a functional behavioral assessment. They might come up with a behavior intervention plan. But really, a lot of this goes back to what are we as adults going to do differently? How do we need to better, support or, but that can be tough. That can be tough because when you say that, it's like, well, it's not me, it's the kid here. Right. So in approaching educators and trying to get them to understand the importance of their own, stress response system and even understanding it, because, again, we're still not doing a good job of people learning about these things. Kids still don't learn about their stress response system as it relates to behavior. They often learn that they make bad choices and there have to be consequences to all of your bad choices. So how do you navigate, kind of bringing the adults on board, but also sharing with them the importance of their own regulation and the things that they're doing and how they affect the situation?
So I kind of do it in a roundabout way. An educator comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm really curious about this. I want to learn about this," so on and so forth. That's great, and we can go down that road and learn about that. That is not the typical situation, and that's not a teacher that's typically in crisis. If you're working with someone who's in crisis, whether that's a family member or a teacher, then what I typically say is, here's a technique that I'm going to use for the student. And do you want to try it with me just so that if I'm not here, because I'm not in any building every day, do you want to try it so that you know how to do it, or you can cue them, or you can teach the other adults in the room how to do this, so on and so forth. And then they start to realize, wow, that technique really works for me too. And it could be something that's really simple, like, hey, I want them to have more serotonin in their bloodstream. So I'll say, hey, have all of your students store their items under their desk. So they have to lean over to lift them. That pressure on the stomach pushes more serotonin into the bloodstream. 85% of our serotonin is made in the gut. This is great. Now it gets into your bloodstream, so on and so forth. So then they cue the students by doing it themselves, and they're actually learning the techniques themselves as they're guiding their students through it as well, which helps tenfold. And then you can see the relationships change. You can see they're starting to say, gosh, I love how this student wants to connect on this certain thing. And that really helps it. If I know that a student loves dogs and the teacher has a dog, then I'll say, we'll work on that and with the dog and that sort of thing. It gives them that piece of connection so that they can connect instead of just having it be a corrective relationship. It can be a connecting relationship. And that's huge for the student, because then all of a sudden they feel like this person likes me. They want me in their space. They want me here. And especially for students that we work with, because they've not felt successful for long periods of time. We usually come in at the tail end when things have gone really poorly. They feel like, wow, this is so different that I want to be here. And it's the same for parents. They say, they'll say, I don't know if I can parent this kid. And then after a while, they say, I'm the perfect person to parent this kid. I am the person who should be doing this. And that's exactly, we want to give them back that ability to say, I can do that. I can be successful. This is where I'm going. And we're really sensitive to what values and things like that they have in their classrooms or in their homes to make sure what we're teaching them is going to work for them too.
And that power of the authentic relationship. And I want to be really clear, this is not pretending to have a relationship. This is not just
having one.
Therapy before. This is actually building a relationship.
Yeah.
The power of that relationship is what so many times has made the difference for a child that could have gone in a very different direction.
Right.
And unfortunately, not every child finds that. And of course, when you begin to look at children who have a lot of trauma, and I often talk about the population of families that we support, and often it's trauma, often it's, kids with disabilities, neurodivergent kids, and there's a tremendous intersection there with trauma as well.
Huge.
When you're in an environment that is not well designed or not well suited for you. So often that this is kind of a common denominator. We see a lot of trauma, and the kids that need the relationship the most are sometimes the ones that have the hardest time expressing it. They're the kids that might be pushing back against you, actively acting like they couldn't care less about you. So how do you encourage the educators you work with? Because again, that kid who's really pushing back and I don't care and I don't need, that kid is the one that really needs a relationship. But it can be really difficult because as human beings, we take that rejection pretty hard sometimes
do.
when we're making efforts. So how do you guide an educator along that might be going down that path, and they're like, hey, I'm trying these things, I'm trying to form a relationship, but every time I try, I feel like it's not going anywhere.
I'm definitely set them up for success at each point. Like I've already done a lot of the heavy lifting, and I'm setting up opportunities for when I know that student is going to be receptive or the teacher is going to be receptive, so that we're making sure it's going to happen, and we create those opportunities. So a lot of people will say, oh, you're going to catch them being good and so on and so forth. No, it's not about that. It's about creating a scenario where they have to be successful, both the teacher and the student, whether that means students coming in 1 minute early from recess in order to have a quick conversation with the teacher, or it's a high school student who might be going up and asking the teacher for a specific tool that I said that they might need, and that I've already said to the teacher, are they going to use this tool for this activity? Even if it's not a necessary tool for that activity, we're gonna figure out a way to make it useful for that activity, so that they have a reason to connect and a reason to be useful to each other and to connect over those reasons, because that's how to make it work. Because otherwise they'll become avoidant. Both the teacher and the student will become avoidant. And for the teacher, they're saying, gosh, this is difficult. It's distracting the rest of my class. And absolutely. And when that happens, that's where I'm saying, yes, we got to find other ways to make this work, because we don't want other learners to, lose learning time and that sort of thing too, with the caveat that we all interact with all humans in all environments,
Right.
And different things happen and things come up. And so we have to be prepared for the different things that are going to occur in different environments.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, this gets back to, I don't know if you're familiar with Lori Desautel's work, but it's kind of like the intentional touch points, right? I mean, it's really being intentional. It's really, it's the connections over compliance kind of ideology there as well. You said something a couple minutes ago about how you often kind of are brought in on the tail end. So meaning that, often and I see this and it's heartbreaking, but, here's a student from very early on. If you look at their IEP and you look at, kind of what they've been through, they've had the same needs for a long time and often not been supported. You can see year after year where the same struggles, the same goals are on an IEP, and the child's obviously not getting what they need. But, very often it reaches a critical point, and then, somebody like you might get called in to consult and offer some help. My question for you is, how do we flip that? How do we move to do more of these things on the beginning of this process? I did a event back in the late spring, and it was for Head Start, for a Head Start event in Oregon. And, I think about, the things that sometimes are going on in those environments where what's being done is laying the foundation for what we see later. So when you look at things like restraint seclusion, when you look at people going hands-on with kids, it happens very early.
It does.
It begins to happen kind of even in kind of the, pre-K, years, where we begin to pick kids up without consent, and we move them around, and we, how do we shift what's happening so that rather than getting called in on the back end of this, that we can be changing things on the front end?
I think a lot of it comes from education and training, and we do a lot of education. We probably do over 100 professional development trainings a year, and we work with organizations like Head Start and things like that, and daycares and things like that, to have them learn better strategies. And we give a lot of those strategies away. So if you're on our website or whatever, you can download like a page of strategies for different behaviors and things. And I think it's really learning those things, and also learning that there's a reason behind it. Like if your child is telling you, no, they don't want to put their shoes on and they're 3, why is that? Is it that their brain isn't shifting quickly enough and they just need a few moments to be able to accept the request and move to the request? Is it because it's fun to say no because they get a reaction? There's so many reasons what it can, but you got to look at those.
Tag in the shoe that's leading to a sensory issue.
Yeah. Or could they not
yeah.
want to go to the activity they know that they're going to because they're frightened? And there's so many reasons.
Right.
But looking behind those things, in saying, how can I work with them to get them to a better point so that they feel safe, they feel regulated, they're able to do those activities. But there's different reasons why. It's not, and a lot of times people are just saying, oh, they're just being non-compliant or whatever. And I always feel like that's a cop out. Like, I don't believe that happens in probably 99.9% of the cases. That is not the case. Yeah. And so it's really a matter of them learning better strategies. So if you've got a kid who says every time you tell them you want them to do something, they say no, chances are that part of the brain, the anterior cingulate gyrus, just doesn't shift well. So they can't transition to an activity well. So what's another option for that? Provide the expectation and then either distract them or give them 30 seconds to process it so the subconscious can settle. So, and then they'll be willing to move. So there's different strategies that we can then use to work with those things that are very fatiguing for educators, for parents and everything, because they're like, okay, yeah, I got to get out the door. I'm late for work. I got to get them to school. I just need them to get their shoes on. Right. I get that. So how can we work with that so that we're front loading it so it doesn't become a stressor for the adult that's trying to provide, trying to provide guidance in that situation? Because once they're stressed, their response is typically because of, where most of us have been in our lives, we're going to resort to compliance. Just do it, get it on, blah, 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 all of those things. So how can we help to make it so that adult does not feeling the strain of that and the stress of that, and they actually find joy in the relationships with their youth, that are in their lives.
Yeah. I find that even before implementing one of the strategies, just pausing and being curious, right?
Yeah.
Curiosity is really, I think, what lies underneath, beginning to ask questions, beginning to move away from kind of compliance-based approaches. You kind of mentioned the why question. I've always loved Stuart Shanker's why and why now, right? I mean, that thought of, why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing it now? But that adult curiosity, in my opinion, is so critical to shifting perspective, because when we begin to move to curiosity versus being focused on compliance, we begin to understand the underlying why. And until we get to the why, we're never going to do anything but maybe resolve the situation this time, right?
Yes.
But if we get to the deeper why, we've got a better opportunity to actually create solutions that are going to be durable solutions. We're going to understand why this was happening. And I think that curiosity, asking questions, being genuinely engaged and concerned is so important. What's your take on that? And how do you, through your work, encourage educators to really be curious? Because sometimes I think it's overwhelming. You're an educator, you've got 20 some other kids. Well, I don't have time for this. So
yeah,
how do you, make the case that sometimes you don't have time not to be curious about these things?
I think I am by nature that person, because I ask 1,000 questions about things, and students always find that funny because they're always like, you think everything is funny, Dr. B, and you always have a million questions. And I do. And my standard response for most everything is, that's interesting. And almost, it's funny because most of my staff, whenever we hear an odd comment about something, they do the same thing too. They'll be like, that's interesting. And, and I always tell educators that when they're saying, gosh, this kid has been really tough and they're coming back off a suspension, or they're coming back from this, or this is going on. And I'll always say, be curious about it. For one, it'll allow you to like this person a little bit more. And you need to genuinely find something you like about them so that you can interact with them in a positive way. And it will also allow you to learn something about them and learn something about yourself. And that's, I think, the bigger part too, is that they find out that they learn more about themselves when they're able to do that, but it also allows them to access empathy. And I think sometimes it's easy to just say, this person is difficult and I don't want to deal with them because of this, and identify them with their behavior and leave it at that. But nothing's that clean and easy. And I think it's, behaviors come from a need always. And I think we owe it to other human beings to figure out and to work with them on saying, like, how is this going for you? And is it making life more painful for you, because oftentimes it's making life more painful for them, but it has fulfilled a need.
Yeah, yeah. You know, what you were saying there kind of brought another thought in my head, and another thought, another quote. You know, I don't have a lot of time to watch TV, but I enjoy the show Ted Lasso, and there was a quote from a previous season, and it was you know, be curious, not judgmental.
Yeah.
And I think that's so critical, especially when we're working with kids, you know, rather than making our mind up. And, you know, we do this. We even do this by process, where we decide why someone is doing something. And we look at well, they were attention seeking, or they were avoiding, or they were, you know, trying to get access to something. But if we can pause and be curious to really understand the deeper why, I think it makes such a difference in being able to support people. And I love what you were saying about the connection piece again, because this is critical. That connection, that's the substrate for everything, right? If we foster that connection, we all as human beings will do our best for people that we like, and when we like people, we see them differently. It's a tremendous kind of reframe when you know somebody and you have a connection with them. You see them for all the things they are. I remember there was a time where I felt like nobody else believed in my kid but me, and it was really important that I continue to do that.
Oh yeah, believe.
Right,
Ted Lasso.
Right. That's the other one. Right? Believe.
Believe.
And, you know, and again, believe in, you know, your child, and whether it's your child personally or a child you support. You know, believe in that kid even when no one else does, and that connection is so important. I want to pause for a second because we've been getting some comments here in the chat, and I just want to visit a couple of them here. We got a question here about, do you ever teach professional development for districts? And I think the answer here we know, yes. But I'll let you go on. And also, in addition to just, you know, professional development, do you do coaching and other services as well? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, we do professional development trainings for school districts. We also do coaching for parents, and we have a system for that as well. And so, yes, we do. Just contact us through the website, and we do try to give away as much as we possibly can so that people can try to maneuver and figure out how to get through things on their own as well. But we do, yes.
That's great. And we had a couple more hellos here. We have Lindsay Belmont. We have someone here from New Hampshire as well, Shelley.
Hi, Shelley.
Great to have you both here. We have another question here, and kind of in the same. You already got to the answer to this, but you offer training or programs for parents specifically.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like? What kind of training you offer?
Yeah, we actually have an online course, and we also do we do virtual but face-to-face programming with parents as well, and we get right into it as far as sometimes like we even do video where we're watching the child and the parents interact and that sort of thing, and then coaching them through those pieces. But a lot of it is very sensitive to what the values are in the home and working with them on what's going to work in their household and that sort of thing, especially for families that are in crisis. And we also have a system that works with that too, if you're dealing with crisis situations and how to respond to different crisis situations. We have a program for that as well.
Gotcha. And kind of a related question, which is offering kind of more, do you offer consults for situations for parents who aren't sure how to navigate behaviors at home, or if a child's struggling at school? So do you do kind of consultations as well?
We do consultations for those. We also help parents connect with ed advocates if they need to do that as well. But we also provide different resources for how to navigate specific challenges that they may be seeing. Also, you know, and we really look at what the structure is, as far as what structure that their child is currently in, and what that structure is going to allow as far as strategies and things like that, because we can offer the greatest things in the world, but if the people that are supporting aren't going to be able to utilize that or want to utilize that, right, then those strategies are not going to work. So we're really sensitive as to where they're coming from. So what I'm offering for supports in place, you know, in Canada versus what I'm offering in Florida is going to be very different.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Another question here. Can you elaborate more on water and it being a regulator? Certain settings, areas, limits, are options. What variety of ways can we utilize water, drinking, certain play? So they were just kind of asking more about what you meant in terms of water.
Water. So for any of you who've had kids that are going through their I don't want to shower phase, if you've ever had a child who's anti-clean, you're trying to get them in the shower and you're like, go take a shower. And they're like, oh, no. They get in there and you hear the water running and they come out and you're like, you didn't shower. You still smell like a stinky foot. I know you did not shower. And they're like, yes, I did. And they go back in, they come back out. They're like, yes, I showered. See, my hair is wet, and you smell it. And then you wish you didn't, because you're like, you did not shower. You just wet the top of your head. And then they finally get in the shower and they're in there for like 20 minutes. You're banging on the door because you're like, the other kid's got to take a shower too. And they're using up all the hot water and everything else. And you're like, okay, time's up. And they finally come out and they're like, oh, I love you so much, Mom and Dad. You're fabulous. This is great. Let me lay on the couch and be relaxed and pet the dog. And whereas 20 minutes before they were trying to get a rise out of the dog, pokety poke, poke, poke. And that water, just the feeling of it on your body and everything else, is a natural regulator. And that's part of the reason why people are so drawn to water, and also why drowning is such a high concern, because they're drawn to the water, but the motor planning is tough. But it could be being submerged in water, it can be drinking water, it can be just filling up a water bottle, it can be filling up a dog bowl, watering plants, listening to the sound of rain, having it projected on a computer. Water in any form will help to regulate it. And it's one of those things that works for all humans. I'm sure there is some humans it doesn't work for, but I don't think that they've found any population that it does not work for at this point. Water is a regulator across the board.
Yeah. Certainly there are things that you can do that can help to regulate you. So there are things that we can do that help stimulate the vagus nerve, right? So there are things that can stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system. Things like certain types of breath in general can be very regulating. And there are, sour candy sometimes, there are certain things that people
intense
may
flavors.
Right. But there's also a danger there. And I'm curious on your take on this. Where someone learns a couple of strategies, getting a drink of water or taking a deep breath, and they're applying these in a way that actually becomes somewhat condescending to the child. Okay. If you were having a hard day and you came to me and you were talking about your hard day and you needed some co-regulation, and I said, Dr. B, go get a drink of water. That wouldn't be very regulating. Or Dr. B, take a deep breath, Dr. B.
Does anybody want to be told to take a deep breath or calm down? We used to have a saying in our house. I was like, if someone tells you to calm down, you can punch them in the face. That's we used to joke around in the house.
So sometimes there's good intent, but then you see the misapplication of good ideas. And how do you ensure, when working with educators, that when you're trying, and to me, part of it's like knowing the science of it, right? I mean, but I'm a little bit of a geek, but when you understand kind of how it works, it helps you to understand the benefit of it. But how do you make sure that you communicate to people how to use these things in ways that will be effective? Because, you can think, well, gee, okay, well, I told him to go breathe and he still didn't calm down. What's your take on that?
So that's a great example. So we have what we create, instead of FBAs, a lot of the time what we create is what's called a behavior response sheet. So it will say when the person's shoulders look like this, or like when the shoulders are raised, the eyebrows are tilted down, you can see the whites under the eyes or the whites above the eyes, or the lid cuts through the iris or something like that. And we specifically write those things and then say, that's when you're going to use this strategy. And it'll say that because when that's happening, obviously the person's moving towards anger. They're more likely to engage in aggression or something like that. So we can give them that sort of information in order for that to go. And so, we're really careful of that. I had a student years ago that I said, one time I walked in, I was like, it was a teenager. And I was like, we're going to learn to breathe today. And he's like, I know how to and breathe, Dr. B. And I was like, yeah, true dat. Yeah, I got that one wrong. You are right on the money, buddy. So, it's, knowing what their body is doing in order to provide that response. And we teach the educators the same thing. When your body is doing these specific things, this is when you need a strategy as well. And they're learning of that after time. That's usually after they're able to learn some about what the student needs, because then they're more receptive. At the beginning, they're not. They have to see that it's working before they're willing to participate, because they're already in their mind saying, I can't take any more. I have done too much. I'm overwhelmed. And so we're saying, yeah, you are. Take this away. Take this away. Take this away. We're not going to ask you to add more. We're going to ask you to take some away so that you don't have as much to do, because you're overwhelming yourself, either overcorrecting and those sorts of things. And it's undermining their classroom. It's creating this dynamic of, okay, you're going to tell me that expectation 15 times, but I don't have to respond to it, because I know until you get to number 15, I'm not going to get sent out of the room or something like that. So, and we're teaching them to say, no, when you say the expectation one time, that's it. You said it one time, but you need to make sure that your students are ready to learn and ready to hear you before you make that expectation.
Yeah.
So it's doing less.
Sure. And I also like the idea, and always have, of, I'm a big fan of like working with anyone. I mean, working with kids rather than doing things to kids, and even doing things alongside of with for the adult to do the same thing that the child is doing, I think can offer some benefit to both the adult who might be ramping up into dysregulation. So doing those things with the child can be beneficial, I think, both to the adult and the child where possible.
Absolutely.
A couple more comments here, and one of our friends from Australia, I believe. And just said, perfect curiosity questions. I think that was on, kind of that question of like, well, how do we make sure these things don't become,
That's good. Pat yourself on the back, guy.
Right,
yeah.
That's right. Let's see. And we have another one here. Do kids get used to certain regulation strategies? Is it good to change them regularly? Let me try that again.
Yes, I do believe they do. Same with adults. Like you get bored, like everyone. I think it's pretty universal for many people. Some people like to go back to the tried and true. It makes them feel safe. It's consistent, and they like the predictability of that. Some people get bored with it and they just go through the motions of doing it, and it doesn't actually regulate them. It actually can agitate them more. So yes, I think in a lot of cases it's person by person. You've got to know like what that type of person is that you're working with. I always create plans that are very fluid, and I'll say, if this doesn't work, go to number 6, or those sorts of things, because of that. And I'm always ready to be like, okay, here's the first page of things. Tell me when you're ready for more. Right. And then I send them the more, because I know that typically does happen.
Yeah. I like the way that you were talking about your plans. And, I mean, I've always looked at it. I'm not a big fan of traditional FBAs, and even probably lesser of traditional behavior intervention plans, because they are almost entirely, and by design, rooted in ideas around behavior that I find somewhat problematic.
I think I find them a little bit offensive. So
Well,
so
I mean, if we apply them to you,
sorry,
Dr. B, are all of your behaviors because you're attention seeking, right?
Yeah, they are.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I hear that, but unfortunately, they end in plans that are based in carrots and sticks, and we're and those things are not working. Those things are not going to help kids develop skills and capacities and bandwidth to be able to do things. Yet that is the common approach. So I love the way you frame that. I like the idea of it. It's really about an individualized support plan. What does this individual need? What are the things that might be difficult for them? How might we respond differently? I mean, any kind of plan should involve the adults as well as the children, if not to an even greater extent. Yeah. Because when someone is having a difficult time, they have less capacity. So, how can they borrow some of that capacity from the adults that are there as well? Somebody asked a question here about nutrition, and I'm curious on your take on that.
Oh, I think it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do a lot of counseling around nutrition and supplements and things such as that. It's huge. I typically, if we have a student who's really challenged or something, if we can help support a change in diet for even a few weeks' time, we see tremendous changes all around in the student. I mean, it's unreal how quickly it can change. And from that perspective, I love working with parents because they literally can open their cabinets and I can say, ooh, that's a great thing for them to eat. That's a great thing to eat. That's a great thing to eat. We need to get more protein. How can we access that? What protein sources are they willing to eat? What's going to work in your household? And we can go from that perspective too, because a lot of it definitely deals with nutrition, dehydration. And you just look at the way, I was speaking with a parent today who said, gosh, my daughter, her anxiety's through the roof. I've never seen it this high. What's going on? And then we start talking, I'll say, is she, magnesium, 85% of our population is magnesium deficient. Is she on magnesium? Is she on L-theanine? Again, all these things you want to check with your doctor to see if it's going to be beneficial for you. But so many times, there are other ways that we can help to work with the body and make the person more comfortable in order for them to get their needs met that don't necessarily always have to be behavioral too. It doesn't have to be a behavioral change, and it can be something that's very simple. Just something like, suicidal ideation. I'll often say, okay, are they on an omega-3 supplement? Because it's been proven that it's like 55% of suicidal ideation decreases with an omega-3 supplement. So just things like that are really important, which obviously is not something schools have any control over, but, it's something we work with families.
And, back to there are a lot of kids that are often having difficulty that are coming from places of tremendous trauma that may have food insecurity and
absolutely
housing, and other factors that are factoring in. And unfortunately, as part of the somewhat traditional approaches that are still very prevalent in a lot of our schools, approaches that I find problematic, but a part of the approaches that are very steeped in kind of rewards and all of that, I've been in schools where I see like a lot of sodas and candy and like being given out by the staff to the kids, and it's kinda like, oh, this is probably not where we need to be.
Not at all. Where we live, that's not supposed to occur anymore. But I will tell you right now, I do the laundry in my household, and I can't tell you how many times, both my daughters are special needs. I'm pulling, stuff, I'm pulling wrappers out of their pockets and everything else. And even times I've said, please do not give that child sugar. The next teacher will really be upset if you give her sugar. But she comes home with loads of candy and everything else lined in her pockets. And you did a good job. Here's that. And that's great. It helps to activate that prefrontal cortex for 2-3 minutes, but then it burns off, and then you can't get as good blood flow to the brain.
It's not a long-term,
huge,
benefit.
No.
When we're focused on kind of the reward economy of offering incentive, that doesn't help kids build skills. That doesn't help to grow intrinsic motivation. That doesn't help with, it may in the short term in some cases provide some response in the short term, but long term, it's not what we need. So question here, is it hard to get educators to try behavior response style when their comfort has been traditionally using FBAs?
Yes. In a nutshell, it is. And sometimes we have to break it out.
The educators, but FBAs and BIPs are written into law, right? So, there are laws around FBAs and BIPs. And, I've worked with, in fact, one of our sponsors that I mentioned, the Bowmans, they do work in really trying to create trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned, functional behavioral plans, because it is part of the law, right? So I've worked with people. I've got a colleague, Connie Persick, who developed something called the Y Toolkit. And it's really a different approach to doing a behavioral assessment. I think being curious about behavior is a really good thing. The problem is our current approach. I don't think it's effective. And, it is hard to get people to change. And it's hard to get, system change too. Because this is the way things are done,
Yep.
Yeah, so definitely a challenge. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your book? So you've got a book here, Ease the Pain in the Classroom. What led you to write this book? Who is it for? And really, what was the goal of the book?
So I wrote the book primarily so that educators, when they're in the classroom and they're dealing with a situation that's challenging, they could pretty much look it up by like what's going on, what the scenario is, and then have a potential response or response as that they could utilize to do it. But I also put it in at the frame of reference of there is other background things that go on, and here's ways to get your those that you're educating ready to learn and in a state where they're going to be more productive. Again, less is more. So how can we make this simpler and consolidate it so that when you're teaching, it's the most productive time possible? And when you're connecting and sometimes simultaneously, you can do that. But when things start to go south or when you start to have a challenge, there's a quick, easy way that you can deal with that. And sometimes it deals with dealing with the sensory system or whatever. Sometimes it deals with attentional. Sometimes it deals with, whatever stimulation is going on. But we put in many scenarios so that educators could just pull it out and say, okay, I'm having this issue, right now, and flip through and be able to find it. Because many times it wasn't possible for them to go onto our course and access that information at that time while they were in a teaching climate and such.
Yeah, I've gotten into a discussion before with folks about kind of mindset versus practice, right? And for a long time, I think I probably leaned heavily into the mindset camp, meaning that I believe that changing mindset was a prerequisite to really making a big change. But, when you're talking about educators with a lot on their plate, with specific issues that they want to resolve, what you hear is, well, we need tools and strategies. We need tools and strategies. Unfortunately, the tools and strategies often given are not the tools and strategies that probably are really necessary. Yeah. But, I've become more of at least open to the idea that I think both approaches are equally sound, meaning there are some people that are far more likely to make that mindset shift first and then follow up with practice. But sometimes it's a practice, when you get people moving into directions that are better practice, that can lead them to the mindset shift as well. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
I think that happens a lot with the people that I'm working with, because oftentimes it's not by choice that I'm assigned to work with a specific teacher or something. For them, it's not by choice. For me, it always is. Right. But for them, it's not by choice. They're not always thrilled to see me or happy about it. And so sometimes I just have to, I'm modeling those activities, or my staff are, we're going through that. And then the teacher is watching it and they're saying, gosh, that worked. How did they make that work? And then they try it and they say, oh my gosh, that did work. And oftentimes even the most resistant person becomes the person that's like, this works. This is how we can do this. And it changes the dynamics of things. And they become that teacher that student leaves and says, wants to come back 10 years later, 15 years later and say, that teacher changed my life. And they did. They did change their life.
Yep. So on that note, I want to go back in time a little bit. I want you to tell me, so there were some things in the book as I began looking at it and reading the book that surprised me, but didn't surprise me. What was your school experience like? What was school like for you? Both kind of thinking about the whole elementary to high school, but then on to college as well. And I say that as I'm holding here a photograph of you, getting ready to go off to college on your first day. What was education like for you?
It was painful. Yeah. Education was painful. I had a lot of anxiety growing up. I had some learning disabilities, and I spent a lot of my elementary years hiding in the building. It was a great place to hide. It was a really old building built in the early 1800s. And there were all sorts of little weird places in the building. Like the library was the super short ceilings that even the adults couldn't stand up straight in. And so there was lots of places to hide. So I hid a lot through my elementary years. And then when I got into middle school, I tried to blend a lot. I was very social and very chatty and outgoing, and constantly was told for me to be quiet. Bethany, be quiet. Bethany, sit down. Bethany, be quiet. Sit down. Be quiet. Sit down. Be quiet. And by the time I got into high school, I never said a word. And so I was one of the quieter kids. all the way up through, and it became the opposite. You need to speak more, you need to contribute. And I became a really good student because of a personal tragedy when I got into high school. But it was painful for me. I spent hours and hours at night studying. It was very difficult. College, my bachelor's degree was very challenging for me. And I decided after I got out of college and started to working in the behavioral field, I was like, I really want to work with students who school's painful for them, because I know what it's like to have school be painful. And that was where I made that transition. And I moved from teaching into the behavioral field and said, I really want to work with kids who have had some experiences that have made school not work for them.
Was there someone in that journey, in your own journey, as you reflect on it, that made a difference for you, or that might have helped you to keep going, even though things were difficult?
I had a couple of excellent teachers in my high school years. One was an English teacher, and another was my science teacher. And that's actually why I went into the field I went into, because of my science teacher.
Yep, not
And
surprising.
it gave me a purpose. I really looked at, I really planned to go through college and then go into the Peace Corps and spend the rest of my life in the Peace Corps. I thought that was going to be my calling. I was quite surprised when I got out of college and I ended up teaching. Never part of the plan.
And then even more surprised is they stole all the microscopes, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask Dr. B a question. With where you sit now, if you were to look back at young Bethany in school, in elementary school, hiding and all the what do you think that you needed that you weren't getting? What supports that you need that weren't there for you?
I think I needed more connection, and I think that was probably the hardest part for me. My first grade teacher passed away just a couple months in the school year, and we had a rotation of subs. My second grade teacher had to move away partway into the year. And again, we had a rotation of subs. My third grade teacher was in a horrible car accident. She almost died and was out the entire year. And I got to fourth grade and I said, something bad's going to happen to you. I'm really sorry, but I am cursed and bad things are coming your way, lady. And so I think because of that, it was really challenging for them. I was really, I think, the only student that had that happen all 3 years. Other kids moved to other classes and didn't have those experiences. But I think because of that, I never developed a strong bond with any of my teachers until fourth grade. And even then I kept her at arm's length, because I was like, if I get too close to you, lady, you're going down. I'm sorry about that.
What a horrible feeling to have as a kid and to be carrying with you, and I think about, in my experience, some of the kids that need stability the most get the least of it. And what I mean by
100%.
that is, when we look at our special education settings and classrooms, there is often a tremendous amount of turnover, like programs move from one school. My son by the fifth grade was in 5 different schools.
I bet. Yep. Yeah. Because it's like, it's having a problem here. Let's try moving them to that one. And
that's right.
It's so hard. Or even, I'm so sorry.
It's not even related sometimes to children. It's just like, we decided to move this program over here this time.
Yeah.
And these are kids that need stability the most, and they often get
really
the least of it. And then that leads to that lack of feeling safe, that lack of security, that, So it's really unfortunate, but I think it's a very common problem. And my son, had a similar situation in 5th grade where he had a teacher he'd been working with for about 2.5 years. This was a really great relationship. This was kind of his person, his person if he needed help or support. She got in a car accident and then wasn't able to come back to school. And it was actually that led to him really struggling, because there were no other people there that responded how she responded and saw him how she saw him. And that made all the difference in the world. And then this is where we actually began to see the journey that we had around restraint and seclusion, because he was getting overwhelmed and he was eloping. And then suddenly, people were responding differently. So that stability and relational safety, I mean, we've just got to do better.
It's everything. It really is.
It is.
And I really feel like it's all of our jobs. It's
Yep.
everyone has to do it as a community and everything else, which my poor husband, he's a teacher and it makes him crazy too. Cause every time we go out in the community, he's like, it's not your job to break up every fight and to make everything feel safe, Bethany, and everything. But it's like, I feel like we all have a responsibility to our communities to make everybody else feel safe because that's really what it's about supporting each other in our communities.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. And ultimately, I'm a big proponent of this idea that, that these things that we can do to better support our children, especially our children who are sometimes in the most need of this kind of support, the same things we can do to better support them, the relationships, the safety. These things not only will improve the outcomes for those children, but they will ultimately improve the outcomes for the teachers and staff. And when you do that, you improve the outcomes for the families and the
Yeah,
communities. Like
everyone.
this goes upstream if you
Yes.
do the work that needs to be done.
Yep. Yep.
So we are nearing the end of our time. I just want to let people know, if you're watching live, and we've got quite a few people that are on watching live, if you have any final questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. We're going to be wrapping up here in just a moment. So you'll have one last opportunity here. And I'll ask a question in the meantime. You mentioned your work with OTs and PTs, and I'll be honest with you, OTs are some of my favorite people in the
Mine
world.
too.
Well, OTs bring a lot to the table when it comes to supporting kids and appropriately understanding child development and understanding. I've often felt that before we even look at the child, when we do a behavioral assessment, like, we should look at the environment, right? We should do a
Absolutely. Yeah.
environmental assessment.
Hmm.
Let's try to figure out why. Let's be really curious. So I love OTs, and I can tell that a lot of your work is rooted in that as well. So tell me a little bit more about that journey. Like, how did you become, from teacher to, I mean, one thing I've learned about you in this conversation we've had, and I relate to it, is like, you are just a very, very curious person. So it seems like you've been on a journey, and probably every day are still on a journey.
Yeah.
How did you get on that journey of really kind of digging into the work that OTs were doing, and how did you then see the value of it to the work that you were doing?
I found a school in Maine, actually, that my son started attending when he was little, and I really felt like this was his happy place. Like, I walked in there and I was like, oh, it was like the
Mhm.
best place. I would have spent all day there every day if I could, and it was designed by OTs. And I started on that journey of what can we learn, what can we do to incorporate this into the everyday life and everything else to make this more meaningful, because it was such a change in my son's life that I was like, this is something we should be able to incorporate into
Right.
more settings. We should be able to incorporate it into community settings, into school settings, and all of those pieces, because it was just such a huge benefit for him in general. I think I probably would have been an OT if I was more aware of that career path
Yeah.
before I'd gotten my bachelor's degree,
It's
for
not too
sure.
late. Go get
Yeah.
another credential, right?
Yeah, and
No, no.
it's one of those areas, like, I probably do trainings for OTs almost
Yeah.
monthly. Like, it
Yeah.
is one of those things that and I love it. They come in with scenarios and everything else, and they're like, I'm doing this, and we'll dig into it and figure out better ways to help support people. I think it's so much fun.
Yeah.
It's one of the parts of my job I absolutely love.
Yeah, I love that. I have a belief that I think you'll probably agree with, but not everybody may, but that we need more OTs in schools, and operating in roles beyond what their typical roles are often in schools. Sometimes OTs are relegated to a fairly narrow lane when they bring so much capacity and knowledge in around development, around support, around, really looking at, an individual. So, if I had anything to do with it, there would be, and I don't mean this the wrong way, but fewer people that are focused on behavior exclusively, and more occupational therapists
Yeah.
focus more broadly on some of this work. I mean, I
Yep.
think it's just so critical. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time, but we've got a couple of comments here, and I just want to try and look at them here. You have a nice
Aw.
comment here. Your work is amazing. I'm on my kids. Okay, I'm on my kids account. Okay, Dougie the goat. Well, the greatest of all time. There you go. But both my children greatly benefited from her support. It's so refreshing to have someone love on your babies the way they deserve. And again, I'll tell you as a parent, I mentioned to you that idea of, there was a point where I felt like I was believing in my child when no one else did. There's something really wonderful about finding a professional that sees your children how you see them, especially after you've heard at IEP team meetings and all these horrible things about your child.
Yeah.
When you find that person. So I'm sure that, that I know how this feels. I know how it feels to find somebody that sees your kid and values them like you do. Another comment here. Thank you. Wonderful session. And thank you for being here. And we've got another one here. What is the process for getting your services, either through a district or just at home? And I assume they could go to your website.
So the website, yeah.
Gotcha.
It's the easiest way to connect with us.
Awesome. And I'll wrap this up with a final comment here from Chantel, who is our lead Canadian volunteer, actually. So great to have you here, Chantel. OT has been a very important aspect for us. I wish we could find support with nutrition. Food is its biggest issue, and I have a feeling meds are a big part of it as well.
Oh yes, yeah. Reach out to us, Chantel. We have lots of tricks on how to work with that too. We'd love to chat with you. So.
Yeah, that's great. So I am going to, in the interest of time, I told you I would get you finished here by 4:45, and we've got one more minute, so we will say goodbye here. And one final comment here. As an OT, I graduated in 1980 in Australia. We had tutorials on completing observations. Watching with curiosity is powerful. No judgment. This is why you're one of my people. So we're glad to have you here.
Yay, Marion.
Love that comment. Love that comment. I wish everybody had that opportunity as well. So again, thank you for being here. So we're going to wrap up here. I'm going to give you an opportunity. Any final words or any final thoughts you want to share with us as we wrap up today?
Empathy, always try to approach it with, how can I feel what this person is feeling and everything? Where would I feel if, those were things were happening? I think a lot of us, it's easy for us to compartmentalize challenges into a box without really trying to feel what that other person is feeling.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we see kids for the behavior and we don't see kids for the human, right? And when we lack that empathy, it leads us to things that don't work. There's a better way. Well, I want to thank you again for being here today with us and joining us for this podcast. We're going to go ahead and let everybody go. I'm going to ask you to stick around for one more minute, but everyone who joined us today, thank you for being here. Thanks for being part of the community. Want to encourage you, if you enjoyed this, found value in it, you were watching live, maybe share these. We produce these in really the hope that people will share them. If you're a family, share them with other families, share them with other educators. This is how we affect change. We affect change by sharing ideas that work and moving away from these approaches that we know don't and lead to a lot of harm. So
truly
continue, please, to share and amplify. And again, thank you so much, Dr. B, for being here today. And I will see you again in a moment. But thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.